The so-called Talanoa dialogue is going on in Bonn at the moment. People are trying to get movement on the pledges they made during the Paris Agreement on climate change, known as COP21. That meant that wealthier countries agreed to raise $100 billion to help poorer countries in the South deal with the effects of climate change. And those talks seem to be struggling for the moment. Now, one country that researchers say is suffering from the effects of climate change is Niger, and not least in the Azawak Valley. That's an area near the border with Mali, about the size of Florida. It used to have some of the best pastoral lands in West Africa, but water is becoming increasingly difficult to access. And people are gradually migrating, at least some of them, looking for better lives elsewhere in Africa or sometimes in Europe. Now, one response to this could be to build better, deeper wells. And that's what the non-profit Amman Imman, meaning water is life in the tamashek language, has been doing now for the last 12 years. Its founder, Ariane Kirtley, is our guest today. Ariane, welcome to the programme.
Thank you, Alison, for having me.
Now, just to go back to basics, what led you to set up Amman Imman in the Azawak Valley of all places some 12 years ago?
Well, first of all, I was raised in West Africa with my parents that were photojournalists for National Geographic NGO magazine. And so I went back to Niger as a Fulbright scholar in 2005, and the people I was researching, among them were the people of the Azawak. I didn't know them as a child. And I met women, children, men walking 30 miles a day, 20, 30 miles a day, looking for water. And nobody was around helping them have access to water. 500,000 people living like this. And that's what inspired me to found Amman Imman.
And they're mainly Touareg? What kind of people?
So predominantly Fulani, so Peul in French, Fulani, and Touareg people. And also some populations of Hausa and Arabs, but mostly Touareg and Fulani.
So they're mostly living from agriculture, from farming, and from raising animals.
So these populations were predominantly herders. They were predominantly pastoralists in the past. It was the best pastoral, as you mentioned, the best pastoral land of West Africa, where all the meat came from historically for the past 500 years. And then in the past 20, 25 years, that's all changed because of global climate change, local climate change. The rains have gone to from 5 months a year to 1 month a year, 1 to 2 months a year. And there's no more pastoral land. There's no more marshes that form, which is where people got their water. Underground water is too difficult to access. It's 200 meters deep to get water, 150, 200 meters deep. And so all the animals have died. So now they are neither farmers nor herders, because without water, you can neither herd nor farm.
So you're also a photographer, and amongst the many really delightful photos that you've taken in that area, some of them tragic, some of them very joyful, but one springs to mind. It's called The Human Beast of Burden, and we see there a young girl, maybe 6, 7-year-old girl, and she's pulling 2 big plastic jerry cans of water with difficulty on a rope. How typical is that girl?
So yes, I take photos and I also write, which is very important because I use my photos to illustrate my writing. And I wrote about this little girl that I met who was pulling the water. So it's more and more common. In the past, people had donkeys, and donkeys are among the most important belongings you can own, because without a donkey, you can't access water. Because not only can you not she's transporting this little girl. I don't even think she's 6 or 7. I think she might be 5. And she's transporting 25 liters of water that she's pulling. I can't even pull 25 liters of water. And she's pulling it 10 kilometers. It's not just she's pulling it 5 meters. She's pulling it 10 kilometers. And yet if she had a donkey, she could actually be able to carry a lot more water. And what happens is when you don't have a donkey, you end up at a well. And just to pull water up, because these wells are not 20 meters deep, but instead they're 130, 120 meters deep, you need 4 or 5 donkeys just to bring the water up to the surface. But she doesn't have those donkeys. She's at the mercy of those that are willing to loan her donkeys and manpower. And so it's becoming more and more common because even donkeys are dying. If there's no water and no food, all the animals are dying. And so it's becoming a more and more common. Yes.
So I'm not saying you're a savior, but one of the things that your non-profit is doing is digging boreholes more than 200 meters deep, I guess, to be able to access some of this water, which is, in fact, there's plenty of it, right, in the valley.
Exactly. Well, that's a very good point. Is the Azawak is situated in part of West Africa where there's the biggest aquifer in all of Africa, basically. Yet the problem is this aquifer that's like a huge lake across, it goes into Algeria and Libya, but it's very deep. And so what we do is we build what we call oases of life. We start with a borehole, and around the borehole that helps between 10 and 30,000 people, because many people come and use the borehole, we build oases of life. We bring in then afterwards, we help build a school if the community wants a school. We do revenue generating activities with the women. We plant trees, and we also help with small scale subsistence agriculture, and we have a big medical program, which is a big part of what we do right now, is a medical program.
Right. So how many boreholes, how many wells have you built so
right
far?
Now we've built 5 boreholes, because each borehole is it's a big deal to build. Right. So we help approximately 100,000 people.
Approximately 100. And tell us then, just, what difference has it made? Maybe take one of the local communities that's benefited. Tell us what changes you've seen thanks to the fact that they've got access to, I guess, drinkable water.
Drinkable water. And water. I mean, I've seen villages that were just a tiny little villages with maybe 20 households and 30 households now becoming major economic centers because people move close to the borehole, which we work around that because that can also cause environmental factors. That is another issue. But I've seen in terms of health, whereas before maybe sometimes up to a half of the children were dying because of thirst and dehydration or due to poor quality water. Now that's limited to maybe 5% of the community of the children have diarrhea, and of those, very few pass away. We've seen women have be able to grow up their herds again and therefore have economic autonomy because they're like a bank account. Having animals is like a bank account. We've been able to grow some crops and have increased nutrition in that way. So we've seen dramatic health. I like to count it as economic autonomy and opportunity and dramatic health effects.
Now, how do you make sure that these boreholes are sustainable? Because we do hear sometimes, lots of good intentions, people setting up photovoltaic, solar panels, etc., in very, very dry areas. I've seen that myself in North Africa. And then if they're not maintained, they fall into disrepair, hard to get the spare parts, people don't understand the technology. How are you making sure that they can, continue being sustainable, these boreholes?
Exactly. Well, that's a major question. Proper management of a borehole and making sure they're sustainable over not just 1 or 2 years, but over 30, 50, 60 years, 80 years. These boreholes can have a very long lifespan. While you have to really train.
That's what you're doing.
That's right. We train the villagers to know how to manage their borehole. But even that's not simple. The good news, the difference between our area and other areas is because they have no other water and because they do want to live, they don't have any other choice. In other areas where boreholes are built, they might have a river or a stream or, another source of water nearby, and so they can choose to use something else, whereas here they really have no choice. But so we work very hard to train our communities to know how to manage their boreholes. And we've been there for 13 years now, and we continue to support and help communities when, not financially, but with, technical wherewithal, with management training and whatnot. Yeah.
Now, you've said, I think in a press release or something I've read, that you've said that your nonprofit is also a bulwark to extremism. Just tell us a bit more about that, about these links between, lack of water, probably linked in some way to climate change, migration and extremism.
Absolutely. So these communities that maybe 30 years ago had 1,000 head of cattle, were some of the wealthiest people in West Africa, have now become some of the poorest people in Africa. Well, what's happening is young men, for instance, are having to migrate to Libya or Algeria or to Nigeria. And with that, when they come back, they bring back much more fundamentalist Islam. In the past, it was a much more, it was not an extreme Islam. And what's happening is you see women being cloistered, you're seeing women being completely, having a lot fewer opportunities to reach, economic opportunities and whatnot. But also, these young men are convinced that a more extreme Islam is the right Islam. And so they go and then they talk to the other young people, which means that they're more susceptible to joining fundamentalist groups that come and recruit in the area. The other thing is that because of poverty, people that are not at all in tune with fundamentalism in an ideological way, but because Islamist groups pay a lot of money to recruit young people, are more susceptible to allowing their son to go. If they're being paid $1,000 to give away their son, that's a lot of money to them.
Have you spoken to people who've done that?
Personally, I haven't, but my team, my local team, has. And we've definitely met families where that's been a situation. And we definitely have met young people. I mean, I have people that I knew where they were growing up, little boys, in the first communities that Amman Imman supported, that have spent a lot of time in Libya and have come back and have completely changed the system of their community, and that are not at all jihadists yet or today, but that are very vulnerable to that type of thinking and very vulnerable. And so what I would say is that poverty alleviation, which might help prevent outward migration, or may actually help create a sort of resiliency, or even provide more education to help fight, where people understand what Islam is and are not susceptible to be thinking of changing their thought, really helps in the war against radicalism.
That certainly would be worth doing. It has to be said. And just perhaps to finish now with these talks on trying to increase donations, funding to help in the battle against climate change for the poorer southern countries, talks that are going on at the moment. If they do manage to raise this $100 billion, which is what they're hoping to do as part of the Paris Climate Change Agreement, do you think that's the answer? Is that the solution for notably the African continent?
I think when you raise money and you give money away, it has to be done very intelligently. So if that money goes towards supporting communities themselves, or movements, organizations, or even just movements that are founded by the local communities and led by local communities, and decide where decision-making is based on local communities, not just in the field, rural areas where I work, but in cities. And if that money goes to help support initiatives started with people that are directly suffering from climate change, then yes, I think it can make a difference. If that money goes to change huge policies that never actually make it to those people that are actually in the forefront, that are the leaders, in their communities against the effects of climate change, then I think that it needs to be rethought, this initiative.
We'll have to end it there. Thanks so much, Ariane Kirtley, the founder of Amman Imman, helping to bring clean water to the Azawak Valley in Niger. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alison.